Welcome to Team Futurism. Today we are going to be talking about San Francisco and the fact that all these politicians are coming into the city, standing on sketchy street corners and giving their little spiels about how like California's in decline, vote for me, that kind of a thing. As people who live in the Bay Area, and I've been in San Francisco quite a bit lately, walking around these streets myself, I think that we want to give our takes of what the reality is like of the situation.
We're here in the once great city of San Francisco. We came in here and we saw people defecating on the street. We saw people using heroin. We saw people smoking crack cocaine. And you look around, the city is not vibrant anymore. It's really collapsed.
According to, politicians who are more than willing to wander through the Tenderloin and giving interviews or giving speeches, they would kind of have you believe that San Francisco's somewhere back in the dark ages in terms of its policies with cleaning up human refuse or whatever. And the bubonic plague is here. It's coming, guys. Dead bodies, rat infested streets.
How sick would it be if Ron DeSantis was doing an ad on a street corner and he legitimately got stabbed by a homeless dude or something? It'd be killer for his campaign, but it would also be pretty righteous.
It reminds me of the Black Mirror episode I watched last night. Have you watched that yet?
I can't do Black Mirror.
Not to get off topic too soon, but you can't? Oh, come on.
I can't do
tell
it.
me more.
I can't. You know what? There was one episode in particular that just ruined me, and I couldn't. And it made me. I couldn't watch it after that. And it wasn't like a freaky episode. It just pulled on my gut too much. Where I was like, I don't like this. I don't like it. There's certain stuff in media where if they're tap dancing around subjects that are, to me, not entertainment oriented, rape is something that once a show starts kind of tap dancing around rape, I'm like, maybe just don't create entertainment around this as a subject, because it just, for me personally, it just kind of tugs on me a little too much, and I'm like, I'll pass.
Okay, interesting. Well, yeah. I mean, that's one of the selling points for the show is that it makes you queasy and it makes you have to sit with real life shit that is either here or it's coming. This is kind of I'm going to write about this soon, I think. This is what I like about Black Mirror, even though the new season isn't as good as the previous ones. And it at least so far, I've only seen 2 of them, but it still is doing the thing, I think, very successfully, where it's taking just something that's normal that we see in our lives and either extrapolating on it to nudge it somewhat into the future, or just it's still here in the present, but it makes you rethink what you're seeing, what the technology is in our lives that we just kind of take for granted. And that's its job. I think that's its one job. Isn't necessarily to entertain us, because there's plenty of entertainment out there. I think that Black Mirror exists, and why it's valuable is it gives us just a little bit of a reframing on how to look at something. And I think that that's kind of important, because right now I think that there is a fairly epic struggle to, for example, the whole AI, right? Is AI the proper analogy for it? Is it Moloch or is it something else? I think that it's important to have our literary framings on this whole new world of just technology, what it means, all that sort of shit.
I think you're right.
I very quickly got off topic of San Francisco, but maybe not. It's a tech dystopia, just like
come on, bring her back around, land the plane, baby.
Okay, here we go. All right. So I was in San Francisco. I live in Sacramento now, but I still work out there, and I was in there briefly on Wednesday and then on Saturday when you and I hung out. And on Wednesday, I was there for a work thing. I took some time to walk through all the Tenderloin. I walked through a lot of the sketchiest parts. I walked all the way up, Larkin Street, We walked over to North Beach and did a nice loop in that part of the city. And for real, the Tenderloin, that whole general area, kind of terrifying, pretty scary. I will say that City Hall was looking good, and they kind of cleaned up that particular area. And I actually saw the mayor, London Breed, giving a speech in front of a lot of children. It was very festive, very happy, very friendly vibes, which that was new, actually. That area used to be last time I went during COVID to that area, it was still mega sketchy, but a lot of the tents in that area have kind of cleaned out. But yeah, I say it's TL, Tenderloin, hardcore sketchy. Like you just see people and you're like, dude, like I wish you were in a tent because you're terrifying me right now.
Yeah.
Like, you just walk by these people like, oh Jesus, you know, like everybody, you're like just edgy, just jumpy, like, oh come on. So there, and you know that exists in other cities, but the Tenderloin is very compressed. You know, it's very tight. Yeah. So you see a lot of just like scariness, just like and within a couple blocks.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but outside of that, the city does still feel very vibey, very friendly. Streets very like shockingly clean.
Yeah.
We can talk about how there are real problems, but then I think I kind of wanted to start with talking about like the fake problems or like the overblown problems. Maybe I'll put it. Do you kind of see it that like San Francisco, yes, needs to clean its shit up, but as people were mentioning in the comments of these things, like it's not like in Florida they don't have like rows of homeless tents. It's not like they don't have that here in Sacramento or like many, especially like warm weather cities have that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, it's not completely framing this as unique to San Francisco is just a false narrative, I think. Let me pass it to you.
I don't really understand the kind of hyperfixation on San Francisco as an example of like, here's what happens under a liberal city government, where I'm like, yeah, but this is a warm weather phenomenon. This isn't like, you don't see homeless people like this in fucking Minnesota, and it's because it's impossible to actually be homeless in Minnesota for the entire year. You have to go somewhere where the climate is mostly temperate. And it is helpful probably that the city government is not brutally aggressive to homeless people and like shooing them out and stuff like that. It does seem, I just don't understand what the fixation on San Francisco is in general, because it's a very metropolitan, it's a very clean city. People are mostly friendly. It's lost a lot of its vibe over the years, but it doesn't. I mean, that's just like a complaint that I have as an artist, not as like a citizen of the Bay Area.
I will echo that. As like an artist city, it feels very dead because there's just too much money there.
There's too much money. Yeah. And the people with money don't care about the same stuff anymore. Which here, this is my take on it. I do this thing where I'll go to the top of Market Street because I have this. I do a job at an art gallery that's like basically I can ride my bike to work and then I end up at the top of Market Street, grab a little joint from the dispensary, smoke a joint, and I ride my bike down Market Street from top to the bottom, all the way down to Embarcadero. I do this a couple times a year. It's kind of my check-in with the city. You get a really, you go through a lot of the different districts of the city, and then you end up, at the water, and that's always kind of a nice place. I did that a couple weeks ago, and it was the darkest trip I have ever taken.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it was, I've been coming to San Francisco for almost 20 years. And when I first started coming to the city, I would be on Market Street, and it was ghetto. It was gnarly. It was a lot of hustlers, and there's pimps and hoes and a lot of drug deals going on, a lot of weird little bodega type stores that were obviously fronts for some kind of drug running operation. However, there was an energy and a vibe to it where it felt like it was cohesive in a certain way. Like a lot of those people knew each other. There was almost like a micro economy. It was dangerous-ish, but it wasn't. Not really. I mean, there's people coming in and out all the time. If you're minding your own business, the likelihood that something was going to happen to you, dangerous or violent, pretty low. This time, it feels different because it feels like there's an independence or like an island kind of. Every person is their own island of insanity. It doesn't feel like there's like this microeconomy of like gangsters and pimps. It feels like there's just a lot of people addicted to methamphetamines that are kind of in their own diaspora, their own kind of disparate like mental and physical realities. And then there's a lot of people that are clearly preying on those people. And there isn't, it's not a vibe though, which I mean, I guess that sounds kind of fucked up, but if you're going to choose between having like a place, like a center point of a city be dangerous but kind of vibey or just straight up horrifically kind of dangerous and gnarly, I think you're going to choose the first one if it's like the best of a bad lot. It does seem like right now the city's in a really desperate place.
Well, I mean, you've seen all the stores closing and I mean just fleeing. It seems like one after another, and like big stores, like stores that several years ago pre-pandemic were bustling any day of the week. Like the Anthropology and a lot of those like kind of yuppie stores down there, gone, and leaving. And so I did take a walk right around there, Union Square. That place, it definitely wasn't dead. Shockingly less dead than I thought.
Sure.
But all the tourists, were kind of like, it seemed like I got the vibe of not sure where to go. Because there's not like a focal point. Other than like lining up to take the cable car, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, everyone like it seemed like used to have just like a purpose of like we're going here, we're going there, we're like people were very, and I just saw a lot of people just kind of like wandering around. I don't know.
Yeah, like what's going on around here?
Yeah, the vibe there was weird, and I get that because like
where are all of the talented homeless, and why aren't they entertaining me right now?
I mean,
where are the break dancers?
The problem with San Francisco is that I mean, lots of problems. But I know that like the Tenderloin, I have a fly on me, Jesus. The problem with the Tenderloin is that there are all these SROs right there, single resident occupancies that are right there. And this is where like there is just a very, very deeply ingrained culture of people just like hanging out on the street, doing drugs, and then they have their little SRO where they walk up the stairs and then they crash at night. At some point, like in like the 70s, there was a plan to get rid of those SROs and tear them down and put like high rises there, right?
Sure.
And like that would have solved the problem because then people who were like doing drugs or whatever, like no way in hell people like in some high rise are going to like allow that on the street corner, and the people wouldn't live there because these people live there. They're sure some are intense, but a lot of the sketchiest people you see like are in an SRO.
Yeah.
That didn't happen because like zoning and just a lot of pushback of like gentrification. Like fair, like a lot of those buildings, like even though they're like kind of up to sketchy things nowadays, they're cool buildings. They're kind of rad buildings that architecturally chill to keep around.
They're interesting.
But because of that, and I don't know why no one like talks about this like structural issue necessarily, but it's not just there are tents. It's this whole district is people who just have a little bit of a government paycheck that they put it to drugs, and then they might have a social worker, but there's enough infrastructure there that people don't need to get meaningful help.
True.
Even if you're not on the street on a tent, which is like literally most people that you're seeing down there. Most of them have some sort of a shelter. Right. Anyway, so there's a structural problem right there that is not being like talked about, let alone like actually meaningfully addressed. Because the problem is the people in the tents, the quote problem that the politicians are commenting on, like DeSantis, and I think it was was it Robert Kennedy Jr. was the other one who he was the first one I think to do a video, and then DeSantis, and they probably aren't the last. I'm sure that we'll see more of them.
I can't stop with the image of like them being like, look at San Francisco like a shit. Just fucking... Oh boy. I want to say something here. I think I've said this on other podcasts before, and I just saw a meme about it the other day, which I found oddly. It was like the meme was, you know how they ended homelessness in Norway? They gave everybody a house and a counselor, and they didn't make there was no requirements for that. They're like, here's a house. I mean, obviously Norway, completely different scenario, right? We've got like a way different socioeconomic, demographic situation than Norway has. But the thing that drives me nuts about San Francisco is that, so they just, this year, they were like, okay, we're going to put $600 million towards combating the homelessness crisis. One of the things that pisses me off about that is that it's got the same linguistic kind of flavor that like war on drugs has, or war on terror has. Like, it's like
good point. Yeah.
It's like the whole concept of like creating a war or a campaign against something that like you can't fight that way. It just kind of drives me a little bit nuts. And then the other thing is like, look at the fucking statistics on this if you don't believe me. But San Francisco has like 7,000 to 10,000 homeless people. That is an unbelievably manageable amount of people. Like 7,000 to 10,000 people. Like our municipal structures are built to manage millions and millions of people, right? Like we know as like a society how to manage at scale 385 million people with like maybe 1 million people at most, 2 million people that are struggling in the margins to find like meaningful housing and meaningful employment. Like that is insane. That is such a small amount of people that we can't figure out how to help these people out. Like that to me seems so there's some kind of cognitive dissonance there where we're saying like, oh, there's like 10,000 people and we're going to appropriate $600 million to try to help them out. What's going to happen is that all of that money is going to be siphoned off into homelessness advocacy agencies. All kinds of people in the nonprofit structure are going to get their salaries paid, and they're going to have meaningful work trying to help other people find meaningful work. Like $600 million is enough money to build every single one of those people a house. You know what I mean? Like there's
well, yeah, this is kind of like, I mean, this is one of those layers. This is why it's so complicated, I think, is there was a big study that just came out this week that again says this thing that, you know, the main problem is housing, like lack of housing and unaffordable housing. That's the main problem. The layer on top of that, though, is that the vast majority, like the vast majority of people who are homeless aren't pitching a tent on the side of the street. Like that is, you only do that if you have like a drug problem or a mental health problem.
Right.
Or, I mean, that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Interviews have been done with people who live in tents, and like every single one of them either has schizophrenia or some, you know, severe mental problem,
severe mental illness,
or they have a severe drug problem, or both. Every single one, you know, for people who've gone out and actually interviewed these folks. And so there are two problems here. There's one, the problem you see, which is people on tents. Yeah. Then there's a problem you don't see that is equally as big, and maybe it's bigger, actually. You know, it's a bigger problem. But since we don't see it, we do have to like rely on these studies and be like, oh my God, there are all these homeless people in San Francisco. Right. You know, you can count the tents in San Francisco. I don't know if you get up to 100. Like you'd get up to 100, I guess, but there aren't like that. Sure. Not 10,000 for sure.
No.
You know?
Yeah, no.
So, but I do think that we do have to solve the problem of just like people not feeling safe walking down a modern American super filthy rich city. Like, and that like the problem is that you just have to take people off the street to say like, this is not allowed. To say it is absolutely immoral and inhumane to allow anyone to camp on the street, even if they want to. Right. Even if they want to. Right. It is immoral, and it's unethical, and it's unsanitary, and it's scaring the kids.
It's political suicide.
And it's political suicide. We could keep going on this list of reasons why it's not a great idea.
What is, I was just talking with a buddy about this the other day, where it's like all of the common sense solutions are political suicide, where it's like you can't let people just hang out on the street like that. You have to put them somewhere. And then as soon as you start putting people somewhere, it's kind of antithetical to American, our interpretation of like what American values are. But it's also like there is no sexy solution here. You can't fix people. And that's something that as any fucking like mentally well-developed person have had to acknowledge in your personal life, is that you cannot change people and that you cannot fix people. People can find purpose and meaning, and they can find their way to having meaningful employment and not being homeless anymore. And people can even recover from deep mental illness. It's possible, but it's not likely. And the non-sexy solution is you have to find somewhere to put these people, and you have to give them services and probably police them, you know, and like that is so insane and maybe that's something, maybe that's one of the things that in a perfect world that like a Republican critique on liberal government policies would be, but then that would really only work if Republicans were somehow solving the homelessness crisis in a cool Republican-esque way, but they're not. It's like they don't actually have any realistic solid ground to stand on when it comes to combating the homelessness crisis, because if somebody had successfully done it, we'd be hearing about it every fucking day. And nobody's done it yet. Nobody has made it happen yet. I mean, Austin has like a success story with putting folks in hotel rooms and kind of like transitioning people off of the street into hotel rooms and being like, hey, you just can't be on the street. And I think that there is a tough love aspect that you have to have towards certain types of homelessness, where it's like, yeah, I know that you don't want to be in a societal structure and that you're not actually really equipped for that, but that means we got to kind of put you into a contingency plan of like being in a place where you're forced to have care. And that is, we're in this weird contact zone between, Reagan releasing all of these people from these mental health institutions in the 80s and seeing all those people flood our streets. Well, we can't be nostalgic for that time period because people were getting fucking electroshock therapy, and it was like a really tragic environment that these mental institutions were. I mean, they weren't helpful, and they were just containing people, but in a violent way.
My hot take here is that just as we look back on those days when people were just like in mental institutions having sketchy things done to them, we look back on that as horrific. Yeah. I'm guessing 50 years from now, we're going to look back on us just allowing people to do drugs openly in the streets as equally morally horrific. And what on earth were we thinking? And I think that we are going to eventually pivot to something that they do in, as you mentioned, like more like the Scandinavian model, just countries in Northern Europe where Michael Schellenberger wrote a book on this that I think is pretty legit about just like it's carrots and sticks. Yeah. It is, totally. Saying, here's your bed, you have a bed and you have a place to live. No matter what. That's free. And the services are free. Yeah. But if you want your own room, if you want your own place, that you have to earn. But we have like highly trained, highly skilled, well-compensated social workers who are going to help you to that point. And it's like basic shit of like, okay, don't do meth for a month and you can have your own place. You know what I mean?
Can we get like, dude, what, like, let's integrate all of our utopian societal schemes. Like, let's get these dudes like Green New Deal, like planting trees and shit as like as labor, and then like my big plan is the mental New Deal, where we hire like 20 to 30,000 like mental health professionals at in like a true like FDR New Deal fashion, where we're like, okay, like it's now a right for every American citizen to have mental health care if they need it, like a Medicare type situation, but with therapy or psychotherapy or any kind of therapy. It doesn't have to be talk therapy, but every person having access to that. It's like let's get everything packed into a nice little package where we got these guys getting off meth, planting trees, and getting therapy, and the government's paying for all of it.
Well, this is I think that we honestly don't talk about utopian ideas enough. It's too easy to say like utopians never happen, and half the time they end up being like worse than you'd imagine. But like, who cares? I think that like people need to talk about what's possible, and just like open up the horizon of options. More.
We live in a utopian society right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I was just at Pride, dude. I was just at Pride yesterday, right? And I was like, dude, 20 years ago, as a trans person, you couldn't really go out very much. Like, you would definitely get maybe not physically accosted, but somebody was going to say something nasty to you, even in San Francisco, like even in a super accepting place. And I'm telling you, man, all these people, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people, just every different shape and size and gender, and like nobody's fucking tripping out about it, man. Nobody's worried about it. People are so like, gay marriage isn't even a thing that people talk about anymore. You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
okay, can I jump in here? Polls have been taken for across the political spectrum. People are more conservative on social issues now than they have been for like a decade on gay marriage and on trans rights and on like a lot of issues. And it's because like kind of again, the Democrats or the far left just took things too far and it turned people off. And they always do this, you know. I mean, it's kind of just like baked in that there's going to be a pendulum swing, you know. It always happens. No one's shocked about this, I think. But like I do kind of wish that at some level the far left just didn't have as much cultural sway, because the way that they approach things and talk about things, and
so extreme.
I mean, like at some level, like I don't think it's bad to just say I personally I don't care, but I don't think that it would benefit the Democratic Party if they just took a stance of being like, we're not going to do anything about it, but we just like don't support having any sexual behavior in public libraries, and that includes you know, any sort of a trans person or a drag show in a library. Like that's not going to like sit well like, you know, the vocal 5-10% of the you know, the left and the Democratic Party. It's also like going to sit very well with like all the people on the right who are just begging for reasons to hate the Democrats, you know. I don't know. We need to give like the centrists less reason to hate, because I'm more into the economic policies of the left than I am the social policies. I think that the social shit, I think it shouldn't be political. It's just culture changes, and and then what is it? Politics is downstream of culture, right?
Yeah, I think there's definitely we could dial it back to a culture of tolerance again, because I feel like we kind of hit that for a minute there, where everybody was like,
so too.
Everybody was like, I don't really know about that, but it's fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's instead
absolutely. That
should be it.
That should be it.
Yeah, I think so, because there is like an element where, and I find this in talking with friends sometimes, the thing that I always want to push back on is this idea that like people need to be nice to you. And it's like, you have the right. It doesn't matter what kind of fucking weirdo or freak or whatever whatever you think you are, how far outside of the societal norm you are entitled to people respecting your physical space. That's about it. You know what I mean? Like if somebody's gonna be mean to you in a way that's destructive to your self-image or to your self-esteem, buddy, we're just not at that level of utopia yet where your mental space is protected by the government. And I don't know that we ever really should be there. Maybe society and culture will eventually make their way there organically, where people are just, we live now in a time where like getting your ass beat is so rare. Like so few people get in physical altercations anymore, and that's a sea change from 20 years ago when people were getting their ass beat left and right.
I mean, now we have like mass shootings, but
Now we have mass shootings. We've kind of always had fucking mass shootings. You know what I mean?
It's a new phenomenon because there's like a social contagion around it. So
agreed.
There used to not be dudes taking guns into schools.
Agreed.
That used to not happen. But
sidebar, the mental new deal that would probably fix that.
Okay, can I give you my utopian? Oh, wait.
What? I think the point that I want to make, and the point I think we're both making with liberalism, is that when the extremity of liberal thought at the moment is that your mental space is equivalent to your physical space, and that we need to make sure that nobody is being called nasty names, or we need to make sure that everybody feels completely safe just mentally. And I think that that's insane, because we are still living, like, as Americans and Europeans, we're living at the bleeding edge of niceness, right? Like it is insane that humans have become this nice. 500 years ago, we were slaughtering each other for bullshit, for just crazy stuff. And like on a day-to-day basis, not even just wars between countries. I mean, people were killing each other all the time for dumb shit, for falling even slightly outside of the norm. Now we've got this huge space for people to exist in where they're physically safe and gather together, be as crazy as they want. For the most part, everybody's going to be pretty safe. And that is tremendous. And you have to have a moment of pause for that. And then also to be like, yeah, it's not ideal that like a Republican might call me a fat. You know what I mean? Like that sucks. But it's also not violence, and maybe you feel accosted by it, but you gotta eat that one, because the society at large is providing you an unbelievably safe space to be whoever you'd like to be in most contexts, in most situations.
Well, unfortunately, I agree with all of that, so there, I have nothing to disagree with there. I do have things to add, but I want to actually jump to one of my utopian talking points that I've come to think more and more about recently. I mentioned this on the chat that I had with Tom Ross a couple of episodes ago, but I really liked it when Pete Buttigieg was not my favorite guy necessarily, but I liked it when he was running for president, and he mentioned that he wants to have like a national service. That when you're 18 out of high school, I don't know if he was going to be like an opt-in thing. I don't think it's like required necessarily, but like an opt-in, the option to like travel to some other part of the country and like serve in the community for a couple of years, and then like gain like knowledge and experience, and then come back into your community. Like,
yes,
I know people always talk about these communities that are kind of failing, right? And like Southside Chicago, or there's these listed communities that have been, communities in Baltimore that they've never been able to get out of, for decades and decades and decades. Same drug dealers, same street corners, that sort of a thing. I think that this would fix it, and I think that this would like just like rejuvenate a sense of being not in a cheesy way, but like authentically kind of like proud of our country. Because if you're kind of like just stuck in your little corner of a city or little corner of a state, I don't know, like when I travel to different parts of America, it's kind of like low-key more radical than traveling to London.
Sure.
Because my culture is like urban, big city, metropolitan, that sort of thing. If you go to like Nashville or I don't know, places like that, or Memphis is a good example. Man, it doesn't feel like America. The food is completely different from what I eat. The people talk differently. The music is different. You turn on the radio and it's like some pastor like yelling at you, sort of thing, fire and brimstone.
Totally.
Completely a different vibe. Completely. When you go to London, you turn on the radio, it's like effectively like, it's a BBC, it's like NPR. It's like, okay, like duh, this is already part of my life, Anyway, so I think that like instituting some sort of a semi-mandatory sort of opt-in like opportunity for people to leave and go out and experience the world and then come back and get paid for it and do community work.
For it.
Yeah, that would just be amazing, I think.
It would transform everything. I mean, it's like you've got a lot of people that are coming out of and who would really not actually, who would completely squash that is the military, because they prey on 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who are kind of directionless to stock the military with. And I think that would be unbelievable, man, because how many people are trying to get out of their hometown, trying to get out of their parents' bedroom, or parents' house and go have an experience, but they don't have any economic capability to do that. They don't have any connections anywhere else. So they're going to sign up for the military because it's going to give them the opportunity to do a bunch of those things while, doing harm to them, kind of inarguably. I mean, obviously we need people to be in the military, but that would be amazing, man. You go to a different place, you get paid like a modicum, like a little stipend, for a year or two to help someone somewhere else, or even just to live with a different family somewhere else, get a different perspective. That feels to me like that is really politically utopian, because that's something that there's no way that any reasonable politician on either side would have something negative to say about. You need the older I get, the more I appreciate Republicans. But when I was younger, I hated them, And now I see, I mean, especially in the post-pandemic, where I'm like, thank God for Republicans, because we would all be, dude, if the entire country was California, first of all, we'd all be like quadruple. We'd have our 10th vaccination right now. We'd all still be wearing masks, terrified of each other. You know what I mean? Like, there is a flex to people being like, nah, fuck that. You know, like, no real reason, just no. You know, like, it's good to have those people around, man. But yeah, we do need cross-cultural contamination between our different kind of types of society here, because contiguous landmass wise, we are so many, and we do have such a diverse cultural range across the entire, North American landmass. That would be amazing if we did that, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any final thoughts on San Francisco before we wrap this one up?
Yeah, here's my final thought on San Francisco. When I was in Montana, I would hear about San Francisco all the time. And it is such a talking point in Republican news circles, where they're like, they have all these things to say about San Francisco. Conversely, liberal states have a lot to say about rural areas and what people do in those places. I've said this before on the podcast. Knock it off. You don't know what's going on over there.
Okay, Dad.
You knock it off. You fucking knock it off. You don't know what's going on over there. Stop it. You don't have any.
In San Francisco, it's like, yeah.
You don't know what's going on anywhere else.
In Noe Valley for like, a day, and tell me San Francisco is hell. Like, come on.
Well, also too, if you put a Republican in Noe Valley for the day, it would still hate San Francisco, because those people are also insufferable. Those are the most insufferable liberals on earth.
True. Just don't talk to anybody. Go to Noe Valley and appreciate the houses.
Just have a nice croissant and go home.
And just don't talk to the yuppies. Don't get the croissant. Just go to the Starbucks. You'll be safe there.
Go to the Starbucks. Get that coffee cake that you like. But no, at the end of the day, that has to be a part of the political conversation on both sides. Is if you've never been there, then you don't actually get to have an opinion. And
I love that. Yeah.
If you've never been there, you don't get to have an opinion. You can observe, but you have to understand that you have no relationship to the place or to having a real perspective on the place. And if you're just swallowing some other news organization's perspective whole, not unlike a foie gras duck, you're just being force-fed these perspectives. You got to knock that shit off, man. You can't think that like, I live in San Francisco, or in the Bay Area, so I have a nuanced perspective on what's going on there. So it is okay for me to like have a broad conversation about what's going on there. When another place where you've never been becomes a talking point for you, you've started down a really dangerous path of convincing yourself that that you have some kind of knowledge base about a place because somebody's told you something about it. And that has to go both ways. Like, people in cities and liberal states need to knock it off with the gun control shit. Like, you don't know what it's like to live in the country and to have everyone around you be someone that has firearms. That is a rural issue. And in cities, you deal with it however you need to in cities, but you just leave other people alone. You let them deal with their problems on their own turf and stop having comments about it.
I do agree with that, but I'm going to play off it a little bit for my final wrapping it up comics. This is something I think about and write about a lot. I do think that more important than a city itself is the mythology surrounding that city. And that comes from things like, news stories, but also it's books and it's movies and it's the artists who live there. And it's the fact that like the Beach Boys were from LA. And so everyone who thinks about LA at some point, their brain is connecting it to like a Beach Boys song. And I think that this is important because in the actual fabric of reality, we are just navigating this thing that we call the world through our brains, and our brain will just like have a concept of San Francisco, and that concept is more real than the real place. And so when you are walking down the streets, you're colored by the fact that it had this hippie movement, and that maybe your favorite author is from here, and that you love all the film noir films that were shot here. And so like, oh my God, when you walk up to like Nob Hill and like, oh, that's where they filmed Vertigo, right? It's like, yeah, that was in Vertigo. Like, that is kind of bigger than almost anything.
I like that.
And I think that I think that people who live in a city have some sort of responsibility to not only like cultivate just normal shit like businesses collecting taxes, I don't know, having vibey businesses and stuff like that. I think that people have a responsibility to draw in artists and to cultivate the mythology around what they are. Okay, let me just one more example here. Lincoln, Nebraska. I know almost nothing about it, but do you know what I know? Saddle Creek Records. Like in all the amazing music that came out of there in the early 2000s with Bright Eyes and everybody. And so I'm always going to think of like, oh, Lincoln, Nebraska. Oh yeah. Bright Eyes, cool place. Or whatever. Like it's got some culture. So, and San Francisco absolutely punches above its weight in terms of the culture.
Yeah.
And I think that they need to play that up, man. I think that they need to, do something to like meaningful change to fix real problems, but also like lean into how like just epic the city is. Lean into that shit because it's kind of, more real and more important than almost anything else in terms of how people actually relate to real spaces in the physical world.
I love that. I think that's like a really beautiful artist's take on kind of the social fabric of reality, and it's like a nice overlay onto the weird political kind of construct that we're having this conversation around, which is that you're right, literature and art are the defining characteristics of our world. Politics are kind of just a side conversation in terms of how we relate to each other, because we relate to each other through symbols. And we relate to each other through symbols in the spoken word, and we relate to each other through symbols in music and sound. And when those symbols are powerful, they control everything. And San Francisco, here's my final thought. San Francisco used to be a really beautiful symbol for every disenfranchised people. And I think that's what made the city really awesome and interesting and vibey, is that people would come from all over the world if they didn't feel like they fit in where they were. And they would find a place here. And there is a radical culture of acceptance in San Francisco that maybe is partially to blame for why its policies around people falling outside of the norm in one way or another are a little loose. But it is part of what made this city an amazing place that people write about and think about and talk about, and has been an obsession in popular culture since it was a real city. And I think you're right. We have to lean into stuff like that. We have to be pragmatic about problems that are happening, but also that there's symbolic underpinnings to the reason that things are the way they are now. And that if that's the message that we can disseminate to people, that like, hey, maybe we're struggling with this part of it a little bit, but it's kind of bred out of a culture of radical acceptance. And all of these people are coming here because they know it's a safe space. And you might hate the idea of a safe space, but maybe that's just because you're in a place in your life where you don't need it right now. And that may not be the case forever, So I do love this city. I would love to see it become vibier again. I'd love to see tech. I'd love to see tech money and tech culture support something other than electronic music and ketamine. And maybe that'll happen. Maybe it'll happen, or maybe it won't. I really hope it does. But I love that you bring the conversation back around to something that feels kind of warmer and cozier and more literary, because that's kind of where we need to that's where we need to go.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, hey, till next time, Devin.
Later, Pete.
Later.